So we get d4, d5 from Magnus, we get c4, e6, knight f3, d takes c4, e4, and now Magnus plays this move b5, and after a4 he plays this move bishop b7. Now as you guys will notice from the bar, the computer hates this move. It already gives white a 0.9% advantage, which is very substantial considering that we are only 5 moves into the game. But as Magnus has pointed out, and I think he's completely correct, when you play blitz chess, first of all, it's a little bit different from rapid, but there is a very big difference between blitz and classical chess, because players at no point in time will have more than maybe 30 seconds unless they really want to sink deep into the tank and use maybe 2 or 3 minutes. But generally you don't have a lot of time. You have to make decisions on the fly. You cannot do pure calculations. You have to play the position more on intuition than anything else. So after bishop takes bishop to b7, Fabiano takes, we get bishop takes e4, knight c3, bishop b7, bishop takes c4, knight f6, castles, bishop e7, and here we get the move rook e1. Now this is still very good for white, but the computer actually likes queen to e2 with ideas like knight to e5 and or rook d1 potentially. But rook e1 is played, we get castles, bishop to g5, h6, bishop h4, knight d7, knight e5, and now Magnus decides to trade and go knight to d7. Now already the advantage is kind of dissipated, and one of the things that we're seeing here is that for Magnus, a lot of the moves that he's making are reactionary. And what I mean by that is when Fabiano goes bishop g5, h6 is a very natural move. You kick the bishop away and you also create lift for your king on the h7 square as well. Knight bd7, only square the knight can go. You can't go to c6 or a6. Pawn on b5 covers those 2 squares. So after knight d7, knight bd7, knight to e5, once again Magnus has to trade the knights, or else white will go to c6 with his knight. So we get the trade, knight d7, very logical move. Bishop to g3, Magnus goes knight to b6, bishop to d3, and now Magnus plays bishop to h4. Now Magnus used a long time on this move, but what you will notice about the time situation in this game is that Magnus is already ahead by 1 minute on the clock, and the position is actually somewhat simplified. Magnus is not in a lot of danger, and so because of that, he's built up this massive time lead, and now he's able to use some time before playing the move bishop to h4. Now oddly enough, bishop to h4 is not the best move in the position, but it doesn't ruin anything in particular. So Fabiano goes queen e2, we get the trade, queen to e7, knight to e4, again reactionary moves, rook fd8, very logical. Fabiano goes rook a d1, and here Magnus plays this unusual looking move, king to f8. Now king to f8 is maybe not the best move, but it's very pragmatic from the standpoint that it dodges any tricks with knight f6. Also potential tricks with fossils don't exist. So just to illustrate the point, let's say you get some position like this with the king's on g8, there's bishop to h7, which would simply win the rook on d4. So very pragmatic moves that dodges knight f6, dodges fossils, no batteries on the diagonal either, and you can't really attack the king very easily. The pawns cover some very critical squares here on f6 and g5 as well. So after king f8, we get queen to c2, rook to d5, knight c3, rook d4, bishop to f1, and now rook takes d1 is played here by Magnus. Now the reason that I'm highlighting the time is because there are a couple of moments in this game where Fabiano used too much time, and this is the first specific instance. After rook takes d1 here, Fabiano uses 12 very critical seconds. He goes from 1 minute and 11 seconds down to 59 seconds. Now the reason that Fabiano did not play rook takes d1 instantly is he was trying to see if queen h7 works, but after queen h7 and a move like queen to g5, queen to h8 is no longer checkmate. The king runs out to e7, and after rook takes d1, queen takes e5, black is simply up 1 extra pawn. The king will come to e7 and will be very safe with all these pawns around it. So example number 1, Fabiano uses 12 seconds versus taking back right away, which you should play in 1 second instead of 12 seconds. Now the reason I'm going to mention all this is because in a couple of moves we're going to see the time play a huge role. We get queen c5 from Magnus. Fabiano goes queen to e2 to guard the pawn at e5. We get a5, takes, queen to e4, takes, rook to d8, and now Fabiano plays rook c1, and here Magnus plays rook d2. Now this is not probably the best move here, but it makes a lot of sense to create the double threats towards the pawns on both b2 and f2. Fabiano goes queen e1, Magnus plays queen to d4 guarding the rook. He does not play rook takes b2 because then there's knight to a4, which forks the queen and the rook and the queen, and everything's under attack here. So we get queen to d4 being played, and in this position knight to b5 played by Fabiano, queen takes b2 played by Magnus, and Fabiano takes. We get king to g8, and now Fabiano plays this move knight to d6. Now the times here are actually a little bit incorrect on chess.com. I think Magnus had more like 20 seconds and Fabiano had something like 7 or 8. But the point is, in this situation, if Fabiano has an extra 10 to 15 seconds here, if he had played rook takes d1 immediately, he probably would have found the move knight to c3 here, because after knight to c3, white is simply okay in the position, whereas after knight to d6, black can go rook to e2, and now you're going to lose the pawn on e5. Your king is very weak on the back rank, and effectively you're in a lot of trouble. Now Magnus was not super precise in converting this game, because after queen f1, queen takes e5, rook c1, he plays this move rook d2, allowing knight c4, and we end up in a very long endgame here, which Magnus will eventually go on to win. I don't really need to add many comments, but the point is that Fabiano's time usage led to him getting into this bad position. Now, at the end of the day, Magnus does find a way to win this endgame. It was drawn at various points. I am not really going to explain a whole lot here. We get to a couple of very critical moments.